This is our modern-day adaptation of the book Dr. Faustus by Christopher Marlowe, The Tragical History of Steve.
Steve came from a very well-off family and finished high school at the top of his class and had the highest hopes of a very successful surgical career. He was a straight arrow but had close friends who became bad influences on him at his 18th birthday. His friends Adam and Luke came to him with an idea that would change his life forever. Their influence would have been easy because Steve was becoming bored with life and wanted more. He just wanted to have fun. Steve had always excelled in everything in his life, and that was the reason he wanted to have fun. At the party, Adam and Luke came up to him and offered him the idea that they would try drugs, and maybe that would get Steve out of his slump. However, Steve felt he was better than mainstream drugs, but what he didn't know was the drugs that Adam and Luke were offering were not mainstream. Adam and Luke offered him a drug that they had just found on the dark web that would make his life better. This idea interested Steve, but inside he was in a moral dilemma between his good and bad self. Because in fact, Steve wasn't bored with life, but he was already found success. So this choice was hard for him because he did want more from life, and if the drug would make his life better, then this might be the choice for him. Eventually his bad side would win, and he would try this unworldly drug. Steve later goes home and hops on his computer, finding the advertisement from the dark web that his friends told him about. This advertisement promises Steve a good life, so Steve ends up calling up the drug dealer to see what this drug is all about. Steve gets in contact with the drug dealer and tries to set up a meeting. The drug dealer does not agree to the meeting right away, but instead, he offers Steve a counter deal. He informs him that the drug is brand new and they're looking for someone to sell it to the public. Steve is intrigued with this as he believes that it could maybe bring excitement and happiness into his life, which is what he's looking for. So Steve would eventually agree to meet up and solidify the potential deal. At the deal, Steve tries to actually try the drug to see if it is worth selling to others. The drug dealer is hesitant to Steve because he knows from personal experience that will change his life forever, and he warns him about this. Steve, however, does not care because he wants off his current path as best he can, and he's willing to try anything. The drug dealer shows Steve the drug dust, and Steve is excited to try this amazing drug. As Steve is preparing to consume the drug, the wind carries it all away, leaving none behind. Steve considers it a bad sign to not take or sell this drug, and reconsiders. The drug dealer persuades him to believe this isn't a bad sign, and that he can easily give him more to try. As Steve actually tried the drug, he realized it is what he needed. He felt on top of the world, and he felt he could accomplish anything. The drug dealer then proposes an idea of Steve getting a lifetime supply of this drug in order to sell to others. And as long as Steve continues to sell the drug, he gives them the profits, and they'll give him the best life he could ever have. If Steve were to break this pact, then the drug lord from the dark web will come and take him away. As this drug made Steve feel amazing, the drug dealer warned him about using because the feelings are just from the drugs. Steve ignores this as he feels he can stop himself whenever, and he feels like he's in total control of his life. The drug dealer hands Steve his supply, and the pact was solidified. Steve left his successful medical hopes behind and hit the streets and started living a lavish lifestyle, selling and taking the drug. Steve was feeling good. Life was finally not boring for him. He had left his sure academic career behind, and his parents as well, and was sure he was never looking back. Once selling on the streets, customers were not hard to find for him, as it seems he's not the only one looking for a better life. He was instantly making himself and the drug lord a fortune. To get people to buy the drug, Steve explained it by saying that it makes food taste better, makes you feel sexier, makes you smarter and stronger than your enemies, makes you sleep better, brings you good fortune, and will make everybody envy you. Steve starts to develop customers, and the attention is making him love the lifestyle even more. The drug is also starting to continue to make everything Steve is experiencing so much more pleasurable. He was having more fun than he ever thought he could have. His thoughts of going back to his old life had fully left him now. However, one day, one of Steve's regular customers approaches him on the street. Steve got the bag ready like usual, but he was surprised when the customer refused. Instead of buying the drug, he warned Steve that this lifestyle can't last for him and will end very badly for him. Steve ignores the customer's warning and carries out his life taking and selling the drug. The life was continuing to prove good for Steve, except the fact that he was starting to want love in his life. One day he went out to sell like regular, except one of his customers approached him, saying she loved the drug and wanted to hang out. Steve pondered this, but agreed. Eventually they would continue hanging out, and Steve showed her the life he was living, and she became hooked. Time passes, and then eventually Steve would propose. She agrees, and they started living the lifestyle filled with the magic drug and Steve's fortune. Steve had never been happier. He was finally in love, and the drugs took all the pressure off of him. Steve then wakes up one day and has an episode where he ponders his life decisions. The good part of his conscience is realizing that he's left any hope of a regular life behind, and the drugs may eventually get to him. The darker side of his conscience, however, is trying to convince Steve that there is nothing wrong, as the drug has brought him great pleasure and fortune. This really conflicts Steve. After thinking for a while, the dark part of him would convince him that he was living his best life. So Steve decides to continue honoring his pact with the drug lord. Time goes on, and Steve and his now wife Wendy would continue living their life together. They would take the magic drug and they would spend Steve's fortune on whatever they please. Steve continued to feel excited and satisfied until 10 years later. Once 10 years had passed, Steve was starting to feel like he was not getting high from the drug anymore, and life was starting to become unpleasurable and boring, like before he made the deal. His wife would tell him that he just needs to take more, and Steve would respond by saying he just wants to stop selling and keep the supply for himself. She does not like this, as she knows that everyone he sells to loves it, and she is still one of Steve's customers. She needs the drug. Steve thinks about this, and he sets up a meeting with the dealer. At the meeting, Steve tries to get out of his deal. His dealer comes back at him by reminding him of the pact they had made and what would happen if he quit selling for them. Steve then realizes what he has truly gotten into, but he also realizes he needs more for himself. So then, in Steve's head, he plans to get enough so that he will only be able to supply himself for life. He asks for more, and the dealer agrees. Steve is happy as the new supply is much larger. He plans to now go home and keep everything for himself, hoping he can avoid the dealers from the dark web. He gets home to his wife and tells her that he's going to stop sharing it with her and everyone else. His wife becomes furious with Steve and admits she only loved him for the drugs and the life he could provide. Steve then realizes her love was only fake, and this devastates him. She then leaves him alone with his new supply, and Steve started doing more and selling none. Steve would eventually start running out of the drug faster and faster than he expected. And then he was beginning to fully understand what was going to happen to him and knew the dealers were going to be coming soon. His parents would then come to visit him after some time with hopes of getting their son back. They had hoped it's not too late, and that hope Steve could stop the drugs and come home and continue a regular life. Steve is already aware that he's broke the pact and his addiction is too far gone, so he angrily just sends them away. After the meeting with his parents, Steve would spend day in and day out doing the magic drug and spending the rest of his money trying to soak in the last bit of excitement he would ever be able to experience. Eventually, he would run into his last use of the drug, and once he sees that he has no more after this, it hits him that the end was coming, and he regrets all of his life decisions. This is when the dealers from the dark web come knocking on his door. They came in, and they asked him why he stopped selling. Steve said he just wanted a second chance at love and a normal life. He apologized and did everything he could to get his life back. The dealers reminded him that he broke the pact and told him that it was too late, and they were taking him back to the dark web where he would never be seen or heard from again. And that's all, folks.